Good morning. As we're waiting for everyone to log in, let's do a sound check, audio and video check, make sure everybody can hear. I see some attendees here. If you can hear me, please raise your hand. Wendy, Vanessa, thank you. Wanda, I see you. Thank you so much. Okay, I see some hands raised. Thank you, Emily. Since we're all remote, Emily's doing my audio and video check. Emily, you can see my screen and you can hear me. Great, thank you so much. We're going to get started in just a minute. I think there are a few people still logging in. Good morning, I see people still showing up. Excellent. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I think most folks are here. Actually, there's a few more logging in right now. We'll give another minute or two for people to log in. Just to let you know, this webinar is being delivered from Austin, Texas, and the weather right outside my window is not great right now, so I'm hoping that does not disrupt our audio or video for this webinar, but it will be recorded and posted later. If there are any disruptions, you will see the whole thing. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. It looks like most of the people who registered are here based on the numbers I'm seeing on the attendees. So good morning. My name is Lori Ayers, and I will be your presenter today. I've done the sound quality check, and it looks like everyone can hear me. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us this morning. The purpose of the webinar today is to provide guidance to educator preparation programs on the issuance of the probationary certificates allowed under the governor's waiver. Due to the number attending this webinar, there will not be time to respond to everyone's questions, but if you will post them in the questions section of this webinar, TEA will respond later. Please note that any questions you post in the chat section will not be retained, and we will not be able to capture those after we close the webinar. See a few people still joining us. Okay, in response to questions that we've received from the field, today's webinar will be focused on 3 areas: how to determine if a candidate qualifies for the probationary certificate under the governor's waiver, tips to assist qualified candidates in the application process, and tips for EPPs as they recommend these probationary certificates. Please note that for the remainder of this webinar, the probationary certificates that are issued under the governor's waiver will be referred to as WPRO certificates or Waiver Pro certificates. Most of the information used to assemble this webinar came from the guidance and FAQ documents that are posted on the COVID-19 Texas support page on the TEA website and from EPP questions that have been submitted regarding the Waiver Pro certificate issuance process. If you have not been to the support page on the TEA website, we strongly encourage you to review the items on that page. The FAQ document is updated when TEA has additional guidance for you, and the documents referenced in this webinar are posted there as well. First, let's take a step back to look at why this certificate exists. The governor's waiver was to provide an opportunity for certification for the 2020-2021 school year for educator candidates who have completed their educator preparation programs in 2019-2020, including completion of clinical teaching, internship, or practicum, and were negatively impacted by the closure of test sites. Since test site closure was out of the control of the candidates, and these candidates would have completed testing and achieved standard certification to be ready to teach in the fall, we received this additional flexibility. The Waiver Pro certificates allow districts to have certified educators who have been fully prepared by educator preparation programs in their classrooms. These certificates allow educators to apply for, be hired for, and retain employment as educators in Texas. This gives them time to complete the testing requirement. These certificates are to meet the pressing needs of districts and educators. The first topic we will explore is how to determine which candidates qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. TEA has received many questions from the field regarding situational decisions that EPPs have to make about whether or not a specific candidate will qualify for the waiver. Thank you for these and other questions you have submitted. They have enabled TEA to make informed decisions and recommendations about the best course of action to take during this time. If we don't answer your questions today, send us another and we will try to assist. As we go through this webinar, keep in mind that not every candidate will qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. Candidates who will meet qualification requirements are those who would have reasonably been expected to achieve standard certification by the end of the 1920 school year anyway, but due to COVID-19 disruption, could not finish the testing requirement. Candidates who have not completed all of their EPP requirements are not eligible for this certificate. Candidates that do not qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate should continue to work with EPPs to complete requirements as they would under normal circumstances had there been no COVID-19 to disrupt preparation. Our first resource to understand how to decide if a candidate qualifies for the Waiver Pro certificate is to look at the waiver language. This language is in the Educator Certification and Preparation Guidance FAQ document that is posted on the COVID-19 Texas support page on the TEA website. The governor's waiver allows for a probationary certificate to be issued for teacher and non-teacher candidates who completed clinical teaching, internship, or practicum in either fall 2019 or spring 2020. That language gives us our first guideline about how to identify a qualified candidate. Additionally, the guidance and FAQ document contains some specific additional information about the qualifications a candidate must meet to qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. It is vital to note that the opportunity for certification using the Waiver Pro certificate only exists as long as the governor's emergency declaration stands. This is not controlled by TEA. We've tried to capture information from the guidance document into some handy questions that you can ask yourself as you make a determination about whether or not a candidate qualifies for the Waiver Pro certificate. First, the red block asks the question, has the candidate completed clinical teaching, internship, or practicum in the fall or spring of the 2019-2020 reporting year? This includes the written recommendation from the field supervisor and the cooperating teacher, campus supervisor, or site supervisor. Second, have EPP requirements been completed? Or in other words, is the candidate a program finisher? Third, does the candidate still have to pass one or more exams required for his or her certification? The green block asks if the candidate has at least a bachelor's degree conferred. A conferred bachelor's degree is a requirement for issuance of a probationary certificate, and that requirement has not been waived for the Waiver Pro certificate. The candidate for the Waiver Pro certificate may have an offer of employment pending or may not. Unlike the normal probationary certificate, the Waiver Pro certificate is not tied to an internship position, so the employment offer is not a factor in determining if the candidate qualifies for this certificate. Finally, if the candidate qualifies for a standard certificate, or if an intern holds a valid intern or probationary certificate, then the Waiver Pro certificate would not be appropriate for that candidate. Now let's look at some scenarios that have been sent to TEA from your programs and think through whether or not the candidate in the scenario would qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. Consider Jennifer, who has just finished a university undergraduate program. She had passed her content exam prior to beginning clinical teaching and registered for a PPR test date in April. She prepared for the PPR over spring break, but her test was canceled due to COVID-19. Ultimately, Jennifer completed 35 days of clinical teaching in the spring 2020 semester, which met the requirement under the governor's waiver that allows 35 or more days of clinical teaching. Her cooperating teacher and field supervisor agreed that Jennifer was successful in her experience. She passed her classes and graduated. Her bachelor's degree has conferred. Jennifer does not have a job, but would like to start looking for one and would like to be able to present a valid certificate to a potential hiring district. Jennifer meets all requirements, so she would qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. In this case, the EPP should verify finisher status, should verify that her certificate requirements are met. They should record Jennifer's TEA ID number, name, and certification area on the spreadsheet, which we'll talk about in a little while, and they should recommend her for the Waiver Pro. Let's look at another scenario that a candidate like Jennifer could experience. Consider a scenario where she had passed her content exam and was not able to take the PPR because her test date was canceled due to COVID-19. Ultimately, Jennifer completed 35 days of clinical teaching, and her cooperating teacher and field supervisor agreed that Jennifer was successful in her experience. She finished program requirements, passed her classes, and graduated. The campus has informed her that degrees will confer on June 8th, and she has a potential job offer for a fall teaching position. As of today, May 12th, Jennifer does not qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate because issuance of a certificate requires a conferred degree, and that requirement was not waived by the governor. She will, however, qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate on or after the date her degree is conferred. Later in this webinar, we will revisit the conferred degree date and what that looks like in the Waiver Pro certificate recommendation process. Now let's look at a scenario where Jennifer had passed all required certification exams prior to beginning her clinical teaching semester. Ultimately, Jennifer completed 35 days of clinical teaching, which met the requirement under the governor's waiver that allows 35 or more days of clinical teaching. Her cooperating teacher and field supervisor agreed that Jennifer was successful in her experience. She passed her classes and graduated, and she now holds a conferred bachelor's degree. Note that in this scenario, Jennifer has all of her required tests passed and has completed all requirements for a certificate. So she qualifies for another certificate, the standard certificate. The EPP would not want to recommend her for the Waiver Pro certificate. Instead, they should verify finisher status and verify all certificate requirements have been met, then advise her to apply for her standard certificate. A note here about the candidate exit survey. When a candidate applies for the standard teaching certificate, he or she must complete an exit survey generated in ECOS. This survey cannot be bypassed. Candidates should be encouraged, as always, to answer the questions honestly. This has caused some concern among EPP staff due to the shortened clinical teaching assignment and the reduced observations conducted by field supervisors. SBEC is addressing 2019-2020 accountabilities for EPPs. Now let's look at Jennifer's qualifications if she was not able to successfully complete clinical teaching. Let's say her cooperating teacher and EPP field supervisor determined she did not demonstrate the competencies necessary for successful completion of clinical teaching. She had passed her content exam, but was not able to take the PPR because her test date was canceled due to COVID-19. Jennifer did not successfully complete clinical teaching and therefore also did not complete program requirements. Whether or not Jennifer had enough credits to graduate, she is still not a program finisher, so she would not be a candidate for a certificate, neither the standard certificate nor the Waiver Pro certificate. The EPP would report this candidate as other enrolled on the finisher records list and communicate with the candidate that she would need to complete clinical teaching or an internship. Okay, I'll stop picking on Jennifer now and move on to examine a scenario involving Thomas, who is enrolled in an alternative certification program. Thomas was a late hire who started his internship on November 1st, 2019. Because he had passed only the Math 7 through 12 exam, he was issued an intern certificate for Math 7 through 12 with an effective date that was his first date with students, or November 1st, 2019. He taught through the end of the school year in a temporary virtual classroom setting and could not complete testing requirements on the PPR, both situations due to COVID-19. Now, the district wants Thomas to apply for a Waiver Pro certificate to ensure he will hold a valid certificate through the entire next school year. Reflecting on Thomas's qualifications, we see that he has not completed an internship because he was a late hire with a start date of November 1st, and also would not be a program finisher. Thomas will complete his internship in fall 2020, and he holds a valid certificate that will not expire until November 1st of 2020. The EPP should communicate with Thomas and his district regarding his qualifications, and then work with Thomas to get his testing requirements completed before his intern certificate expires in November. Let's examine another scenario that was developed based on a question that has been presented by several EPPs. The question was about a candidate that completes the clinical teaching internship or practicum in spring 2020 but is completing final coursework in the summer. For example, Gregory is a teacher candidate in a university-based post-bac program. He entered the teaching program in fall 2018. He dropped a required course in spring 2019 due to illness and moved forward to finish his remaining required courses, including clinical teaching, which he completed in spring 2020. Gregory now needs to circle back around and pass the course he dropped due to illness. He is enrolled in the first summer session to complete that course. He will graduate in August with his master's degree and requirements completed for the certificate. Gregory has not passed the PPR. The master's degree is not a requirement for issuance of the Waiver Pro certificate. However, Gregory has not yet completed program requirements. Requirements must be complete before the EPP can recommend the certificate, this Waiver Pro certificate. We cannot see into the future to determine if he will complete requirements in the summer. This candidate should be closely monitored. If Gregory completes requirements and does not take the PPR, he will be eligible for the Waiver Pro certificate. But once the governor's declaration of emergency expires, eligible candidates will no longer be able to get these certificates and EPPs will not be able to recommend them. TEA does not control the expiration of the governor's declaration. The EPP is encouraged to work with Gregory to pass the PPR, and if he does complete requirements for his EPP, then Gregory will qualify for the standard teaching certificate. We recommend that, if possible, Gregory take the PPR. You have also submitted questions to TEA about your candidates in non-teacher programs. Consider the candidate that completes the practicum in spring 2020, but is completing final coursework in the summer. For example, Dario is a candidate in a university-based post-bac program. His principal program design is such that his practicum was completed across several courses, with his final practicum work completed in the spring of 2020. He now has one or more courses to complete before he will be a program finisher. Dario expects the course to be completed in the summer, and he expects to graduate in August with his master's degree and requirements completed for a principal certificate. Dario has passed his certification exams. The master's degree is not a requirement for issuance of the Waiver Pro certificate. However, Dario has not yet completed program requirements. Requirements must be complete before the EPP can recommend the certificate. We cannot see into the future to determine if he will complete requirements in the summer. This candidate should be closely monitored. We recommend that the EPP proceed in Dario's certification process the same way they would have if COVID-19 was not a factor. Once Dario completes requirements and the master's degree confers in August, then Dario will qualify for the standard Principal as Instructional Leader certificate. If he does not complete requirements, the EPP could place Dario on an intern or probationary certificate to complete a supervised internship while completing remaining program requirements. So we have examined the qualifications of educator candidates in a variety of scenarios in undergraduate, post-bac, and alternative certification programs. As you are considering your other candidates and their qualifications, keep in mind that if a candidate meets all requirements, including testing for a standard certificate, then recommend the standard and not the Waiver Pro certificate. A candidate that did not successfully complete the clinical teaching, internship, or practicum requirement, even with the allowance in the governor's waiver, must finish or repeat the experience and will not qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. If a candidate holds a valid intern or probationary certificate already, he or she will not qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. And if the candidate still has coursework to complete after spring 2020, the candidate is not eligible for the Waiver Pro certificate until all EPP requirements are complete. We encourage EPPs to work with those candidates to complete testing requirements. Remember, as we move into the summer and society and processes begin to return to normal, the EPP will want to process candidates as usual without considering the Waiver Pro certificate as an option. We know we have not addressed every possible nuance of situations you may have within your program. Hopefully, we have provided you with some perspective and some guidelines to follow so that you can efficiently identify and provide guidance to the qualified candidates. The second topic we'll be focusing on today is to provide you with some detail about candidate applications for the Waiver Pro certificate. Please note as we move through this next set of slides that the descriptor qualified candidates is referencing those candidates that have been determined by you to qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. Let's move on now to look at some guidance points that you may need to assist your qualified candidates as they apply for the Waiver Pro certificate. Candidates who have already held a certificate of some kind will have experience in the application process. Your clinical teacher candidates may not. Candidates will apply for the Waiver Pro certificate as they do any other certificate through their educator accounts in ECOS or the blue screen. The qualified candidate must follow the probationary certificate application process instead of the standard certificate application process in the blue screen. Let's look at some detail now around the candidate application process. First, you have a resource. Our fantastic certification department staff have put together a step-by-step instructional document that contains screenshots. That document is posted on the TEA website on the COVID-19 Support Texas Educators page. It is the document at the bottom of the list called Candidate Instructions for Applying for Probationary Certification. We encourage you to either guide qualified candidates to this page on the website or to provide these instructions as an electronic or physical handout to your qualified candidates. As programs have read through the documents that TEA has provided so far, some questions have come up about various aspects of the application process. Here are some helpful tips. First, normally when a candidate applies for a probationary certificate, a reminder notice pops up. The notice reminds the candidate to make sure he or she meets the requirements for the probationary certificate and identifies the candidate must have the required test passed and must have an appropriate internship assignment secured. Candidates and programs have expressed concern about this reminder. Please note that the testing requirement has been waived by the governor for qualified candidates, and having a job lined up is not a requirement to qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. Altering this notification would require IT resources and time that are not feasible for issuance of the Waiver Pro certificate, which is a temporary certificate, so qualified candidates seeking the Waiver Pro certificate should disregard bullets 2 and 3 of this message. I need to add 2 notes here. Note number 1, under normal circumstances, having an internship lined up would be a requirement for issuance of an intern or probationary certificate for a candidate who does not qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate, which would include those candidates who still need to successfully complete an internship and those who have not finished requirements with their EPP. The second note is that the grade level and subject area recommended on the Waiver Pro certificate must match the preparation and training completed by the candidate. However, that will be something the program controls when making the recommendation, and we will go over that in part 3. Some important reminders about the Waiver Pro certificate that your candidates should be made aware of. First, fingerprinting is required. While testing requirements were waived for the Waiver Pro certificate, the fingerprint requirement was not waived. If fingerprints are complete and accepted by TEA and the application fee has been paid, the Waiver Pro certificate should issue immediately after it is recommended. The candidate should be advised to look for the confirmation email generated from ECOS. Candidates may apply before the May 15th opening of the priority recommendation window, which will allow them to go ahead and get fingerprints completed. The application will just sit in your recommendation list and wait for you to recommend when the window opens up. Also, if the candidate meets requirements for the certificate, you can make the recommendation even if the payment or fingerprints are not yet complete. The certificate will pend until the payment and fingerprints are complete, and then the certificate will issue. Point number 2. Once the candidate has been issued the Waiver Pro certificate, it will be effective for 1 full calendar year. If at any point after issuance the candidate meets the final requirement for a standard certificate, the standard may be recommended. Candidates will need to complete a new application, including the associated fee for the standard. No action needs to be taken on the Waiver Pro certificate. It will naturally expire. Point 3. Please communicate regularly with candidates to complete testing requirements. At the end of the calendar year, which is this time next year, the Waiver Pro certificate will expire, and the only other option for the candidate at that time will be a standard certificate. All requirements, including testing, must be met for the standard certificate. Please communicate the certificate application process to your candidates so that they do not slip through the cracks and miss deadlines. You might even want to have a process in place for your candidates to notify your EPP when the application has been submitted. At the minimum, they could forward the confirmation email they receive from ECOS to you. You might also consider sending a reminder to candidates about midpoint through the recommendation window, let's say in early June. During the priority recommendation window, which is May 15th through July 1st, the process for recommending the Waiver Pro certificates will be automated. ECOS will be temporarily modified to allow your EPP to easily recommend these certificates. This ensures that these certificates will issue in a timely manner and that your candidates will be certified to start teaching in the fall. We highly recommend that you get your candidates through this process expediently. Once the governor's declaration of emergency expires, eligible qualified candidates will no longer be able to get these certificates, and EPPs will not be able to recommend them. TEA does not control the expiration of the governor's declaration. You can see on the timeline that the application window is wider than the recommendation window. This is because, as mentioned earlier, candidates may apply for the Waiver Pro certificate before the window opens, and the application will just wait for you in your recommendation list until you make the recommendation. Candidates should identify your EPP as the recommending entity and should not identify the ZZZ entity. TEA has had questions about this. Please know that the ZZZ entity for training and testing is our dummy EPP that we use for production testing and for grabbing screenshots, such as those used in the guidance documents. ZZZ is not a real EPP, and there is no one in that entity to recommend certificates. If a candidate applies for the Waiver Pro certificate and does not meet the qualifications, you can just remove the application as you would normally and notify the candidate that that certificate cannot be recommended. As long as the certificate does not issue, the application fee can usually be refunded or rolled over to another certificate. Let's move on to the final topic, which is recommending the Waiver Pro certificate for qualified candidates. We've had several questions around the finer details of recommending, so let's address those now. Remember, we may not have addressed all questions, so if you don't see yours reflected here, post your questions in the question section of this webinar, or reach out to your assigned program specialist, and we will respond later. Again, you have excellent resources that have been put together for you by your educator, leadership, and quality team who continue to work diligently to address your concerns and issues related to COVID-19. On the COVID-19 Support Texas Educators page on the TEA website, you will find the guidance document called EPP Instructions to Issue a Probationary Certificate Authorized by Emergency Waivers. This instructions document provides guidance and screenshots for EPP staff to recommend the Waiver Pro certificate. Also, the guidance FAQ document posted on this page is updated periodically by TEA in response to your questions, so continue to check in with that document as well. Let's review this timeline again. While the qualified candidate may apply for the Waiver Pro certificate anytime between now and up to the end of the priority recommendation window on July 1st, 2020, the EPP has a window from May 15th through July 1st in which to make all recommendations for the Waiver Pro certificate using the automated process in ECOS. Note that this window has been expanded from June 15th to July 1st to allow programs more time to process candidates. Please note the EPP may recommend other certificates for candidates as needed at any time. The May 15th through July 1st window is the priority window for recommending the Waiver Pro certificate, because on July 2nd, the EPP will no longer have the automated bypass option needed to recommend the Waiver Pro certificate. We highly recommend that you identify qualified candidates and recommend their Waiver Pro certificates expediently. Once the governor's declaration of emergency expires, eligible candidates will no longer be able to get these certificates, and EPPs will not be able to recommend them. TEA does not control the expiration of the governor's declaration. Something to remember here is that this window is about the recommendation, which means if the qualified candidate has not completed fingerprinting, for example, as long as the EPP makes the recommendation by the July 1st deadline, the certificate should actually issue after July 1st when the fingerprints are complete and have been accepted by TEA. Taking a step back to summarize the process regarding the Waiver Pro certificates, it looks like EPP staff will be pretty busy. The first step is to identify candidates that qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate and verify that each has met requirements. Then the EPP will need to communicate relevant information and instructions to the qualified candidates in a timely fashion so that all may meet the deadlines for issuance of the Waiver Pro certificate. The automated recommendation process will be available through July 1st. The second step is the actual recommendation of the certificates. The individual that recommends in the EPP will need certification officer access to ECOS for entities. The EPP will need to complete the TEA spreadsheet with the required information for all qualified candidates who have been recommended for the Waiver Pro certificate, and will need to submit that spreadsheet document once it is complete to TEA via the help desk, which is secure. The EPP will need to make the Waiver Pro certificate recommendations using the intensive pre-service test bypass option, which we will look at more closely in a minute. The EPP and the candidate should verify that the certificate issues. Although the EPP will not be required to provide field supervision or report observations for candidates holding a Waiver Pro certificate, the program will need to continue to work closely with candidates to assist them with completing testing requirements in a timely fashion. Because, as we stated earlier, the Waiver Pro certificate is not renewable after the certificate expires next year. You might think about even developing a calendar of some sort or a reminder process to help candidates keep track of time regarding testing. As educators, we know that when a teacher gets in the classroom and becomes engrossed in the school year, the year slips away, and we don't want candidates to lose track of testing requirements. This is one of the screenshots in the instructions document. For those of you familiar with the certificate recommendation screens, you will recognize this as the bottom half of the probationary certificate recommendation screen. I would like to take a closer look at some of these areas to make sure everyone is confident about how to complete the information for the Waiver Pro certificates. First, look at the item labeled A, which is requesting the recommender to identify the internship assignment. Normally, the district or campus on which the candidate completes the internship would be entered here. However, the candidate receiving the Waiver Pro certificate will not have an internship and may not even have a job offer yet. Since the certificate cannot be recommended without completing this field, TEA has provided the assignment location called 000005 TEA Cohort 2020 for this purpose. There are two drop-downs for this field. One allows you to search by district name and the other by county district code. If you use the county district code drop-down, the 000005 TEA Cohort 2020 option will appear fifth on the list, I believe. You will use only this assignment when recommending the Waiver Pro certificate, even if the district or employment is known, such as for an intern that is currently employed and has just finished an internship. Now let's look at the item labeled B, which is requesting the internship begin date. The date in this field becomes the effective date on the certificate. This field is flexible and will accept a future date, as often happens when programs recommend probationary certificates with effective dates that align with the start date of the internship. The candidate receiving the Waiver Pro certificate will not have an internship and may not even have a job offer yet. So you can just populate this field with the date the recommendation was made. The certificate will be valid. The certificate will be valid for a full calendar year from the date you put into the internship begin field date. So if the assignment start date is identified as June 5th, 2020, because that is the date the certificate was recommended, then it will expire June 5th, 2021. This field will accept a future date, but a hiring district may want the certificate to be effective when they make the offer of employment. It is important to note here that the effective date on the certificate, which is the assignment start date on the recommendation screen, cannot be before the date the degree is conferred, because a conferred degree is required for a certificate and the degree requirement was not waived. Next, look at the field labeled E. This checkbox says eligible for intensive pre-service. The IPS checkbox is a very important field that must be completed for the Waiver Pro certificate to issue without the required test pass. Checking this box bypasses the test requirement. If you forget to check the IPS box, you will get an error message stating the required tests have not been passed. If this happens, go back to the recommendation page, check the IPS box, and re-recommend. When you check the IPS box and then select recommend, you will get a pop-up reminding you that the appropriate test must have been passed. You will need to select OK for the certificate to issue. Please do so with confidence since the governor waived the test requirement for qualified candidates. A very important reminder, EPPs should not use the IPS checkbox for any other intern or probationary certificate recommendations. This is only to be used by programs to recommend the Waiver Pro certificate for candidates that meet qualifications as addressed in part 1 of this webinar. If the IPS option is used to issue certificates for non-qualified candidates, those certificates will be removed by TEA. The IPS checkbox will appear on your recommendation screen on May 15th. When the priority recommendation window closes at the end of the day on July 1st, the IPS checkbox will drop off your recommendation screen and will no longer appear as an option on July 2nd. We highly recommend that you get your candidates through this process expediently. Once the governor's declaration of emergency expires, eligible candidates will no longer be able to get these certificates, and EPPs will not be able to recommend them. TEA does not control the expiration of the governor's declaration. Note that the IPS checkbox will also appear on your intern certificate recommendation screen. This should not be used by the EPP to issue any intern certificates. Let's take a closer look at the pop-up that you will see when you recommend the Waiver Pro certificate using the IPS checkbox. Again, you may feel nervous about affirming that the testing requirements have been met before you recommend. But please remember that the testing requirement for the Waiver Pro certificate has been waived for qualified candidates. You are, however, responsible for making sure the candidate meets the non-waived requirements for the certificate, such as a conferred degree. While TEA would like to be able to remove this affirmation for the purpose of recommending the Waiver Pro certificate, we cannot, because it requires IT resources and programming, which is not feasible for the Waiver Pro certificate, which is a temporary solution. When making the recommendation for a qualified candidate, just take a deep breath and select OK. It will be OK as long as the candidate qualifies. When EPPs have the final list of candidates who qualify and are recommended for the Waiver Pro certificate, the EPP will then need to compile that information onto the probationary certificate recommendation report and submit that to TEA via the help desk. The report is in the format of an Excel spreadsheet with 3 pages. On tab 1, the instructions tab, the program should read through the instructions and tips and then complete the EPP information in the highlighted yellow region. Under tab 2, the Cert Information tab, the EPP will enter the requested information for all candidates that the EPP certified using the Waiver Pro certificate. Tab 3, the Cert License ID tab, is informational only, and it contains a list of the certificate license IDs for your convenience. These Cert License IDs can also be found in your green screen. Once the spreadsheet is complete, save a copy for your records and then submit to TEA via the help desk, which is secure. The report should be submitted to TEA after your recommendations have been completed. In the instructional document, you will see some tips and reminders embedded throughout the instructions. This tip says you may wish to have a process for candidates to notify your EPP once they have submitted their application. This is important because sometimes candidates apply and choose the wrong entity. They may think you are aware of their pending application when you may not see it because it is in the recommendation list for a different EPP. This happens frequently to programs in systems with numerous EPPs bearing similar names, such as with the UT and A&M system programs. This tip reminds the EPP that you are only recommending the Waiver Pro certificate in the area or areas that you would be recommending the standard certificate for that candidate. In other words, only in the areas in which you prepared the candidate. You will have verified the certificate areas when you verified the candidate met qualification requirements for the Waiver Pro certificate. As with all EPP documentation regarding candidate preparation, this will be auditable information in a 5-year review. Since the priority recommendation window is tight, to be efficient, you might want to remind the candidate of the route in which he or she was prepared. The route selected when the candidate applies is what drives the drop-down menu that shows up on your recommendation screen. Candidates completing certification requirements through an undergraduate program or post-bac program will select the university-based route option. All other candidates, including those enrolled in university alternative programs, will select the alternative route option. We touched on this earlier. It is very important that candidates stay focused on the temporary nature of this Waiver Pro certificate. While it will qualify them to be employed for a year in the role identified on the certificate, it will expire and will not be renewed. Because the candidate was identified as a program finisher, he or she will not have the option of entering a program in that area to get another intern or probationary certificate in the future. The only option will be the standard certificate, which will require all tests to be passed. We hope that you have found the information in this webinar useful. As you move forward with recommending the Waiver Pro certificates for your candidates, keep in mind these messages. First, not every candidate will qualify for the Waiver Pro certificate. The governor's waiver is meant to provide an opportunity for certification for the 2020-2021 school year for educators who have completed their educator programs, including clinical teaching, internship, or practicum completion in 1920, and who were negatively impacted by the closure of test sites. Since test site closure was out of the control of the candidates, and these candidates would have completed testing and achieved standard certification to be ready to teach in the fall, we received this additional flexibility. Second, remember the priority recommendation window is open from May 15th through July 1st. During this window, the process for recommending Waiver Pro certificates will be automated. ECOS will be temporarily modified to allow your EPP to easily recommend these certificates. This ensures that these certificates will issue in a timely manner and that your candidates will be certified and eligible for employment in the certified role in the fall. We highly recommend that you get your candidates through this process expediently. Once the governor's declaration of emergency expires, eligible candidates will no longer be able to get these certificates, and EPPs will not be able to recommend them. TEA does not control the expiration of the governor's declaration. And third, TEA continues to provide resources for EPPs that contain assistance and guidance regarding candidate preparation and certification during the COVID-19 disruption. We have referenced several of those resources here today. To find these resources, go to the TEA website and navigate to the COVID-19 Support Texas Educators page. You can link to this page from the Texas Educators tile on the Coronavirus COVID-19 Support and Guidance page. EPPs will find most helpful the document called Educator Certification and Preparation Guidance FAQ, and the document called EPP Instructions to Issue a Probationary Certificate Authorized by Emergency Waivers. The Guidance FAQ document is updated periodically by TEA in response to your questions. The EPP Instructions document provides guidance and screenshots for EPP staff to recommend the Waiver Pro certificate. We've come to the end of our webinar today, and TEA would like to thank you again for your time and attendance. If you have additional questions, please feel free to capture them here on the webinar, and we will try to respond to them, or submit the questions to your assigned program specialist, and the program specialist will submit those questions to TEA for consideration. We hope you all stay well and have a nice rest of your day. Thank you.